The sun was low, casting an orange hue over the fields of Green Valley. Jonah Carter, a simple farmer in his early 30s, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, staring out over the land he had worked for years. The soil beneath his boots felt familiar, but today, there was something unusual about the day. The air was thick with tension, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. His farm was small, tucked away in the rolling hills of southern Oregon, a place most people only passed by when driving to somewhere more exciting. But to Jonah, it was everything. The land, the animals, and the quiet, it was his world. But as he worked to gather his tools at the end of another exhausting day, he heard something that made his heart leap into his throat. A soft, desperate cry for help. At first, he thought it was a figment of his imagination, perhaps the wind playing tricks on him. But the second cry was louder, more distinct. Without thinking, Jonah sprinted toward the source, his boots kicking up dirt as he cut through the rows of corn. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a lost traveler? Maybe an injured animal? He reached the edge of his property, just beyond the barn, where the wild brush began. The cry came again, a faint, choking sound that seemed to be caught somewhere between fear and desperation. Jonah pushed through the overgrown weeds, his breath coming quicker with each step. And then, he saw it. Lying in the tall grass, a woman, unconscious, bloodied, and barely breathing. Her face was pale, her clothes torn, and her hands clutched at her side as if she was holding on to something for dear life. Her jet-black hair was tangled with dirt, and her once pristine pilot uniform was now a wreck, stained with blood and dirt. Jonah's stomach twisted. He had never seen anyone like her before. Her presence in the middle of his farm, in the wilds of nowhere, made no sense. Instinctively, Jonah dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he checked for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. She was alive. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. What had happened to her? A plane crash. Was she from a nearby town? No matter how he tried to piece it together, it didn't add up. But then, something caught his eye. A flash of gold on her wrist, barely visible beneath the dirt and blood. A watch, expensive, luxury, and completely out of place in the field. Jonah's heart skipped a beat. How could someone like her end up in the middle of his land? The gold watch was just the beginning. He noticed more details now that he was closer. Her shoes, scuffed but clearly designer. The faint smell of expensive perfume mixed with the blood and dirt. This woman was not a typical traveler. She was something else. Jonah's mind raced. Should he call for help? The nearest hospital was miles away, and he wasn't sure if she could survive that long. Should he take her to town? Or could he possibly save her himself? The decision weighed heavily on him, but there was no time for hesitation. He gently scooped her up in his arms, wincing as he adjusted his hold on her fragile body. With her in his arms, Jonah turned toward the farmhouse, the firelight from the kitchen window casting a warm glow on the path ahead. But as he walked, a strange thought gnawed at the back of his mind. There was something undeniably familiar about her, something he couldn't place. Maybe it was the way she looked, or perhaps the sense of danger that surrounded her. Suddenly, the world seemed to shift. The faint sound of helicopters in the distance cut through the quiet evening air. Jonah's grip tightened on the woman as his instincts kicked in. Someone was looking for her. Someone who might know more about her than he did. And that meant his life was about to change forever. He reached the farmhouse, struggling to keep his pace steady despite the weight of her body. His wife, Emily, was just finishing up dinner in the kitchen. Her back was turned when he entered, but she quickly spun around at the sight of him, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of the woman in his arms. Jonah! What happened? Who is she? Emily asked, her voice filled with concern. Jonah carefully laid the woman down on the couch, his eyes scanning her battered form once more. I don't know. I found her out in the fields. She was she was barely alive. Emily moved quickly to assess the woman's injuries, her brow furrowing. She looks like she's been through a plane crash. Do you think she's one of those missing pilots? Jonah didn't know. But he did know one thing: there was something about this woman that didn't belong here. Before he could respond, a sudden knock on the door interrupted the silence. His heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? Emily shot Jonah a look, her eyes wide with worry. Answer it. We need to know what's going on. Jonah nodded, though his mind was spinning. He approached the door cautiously, wondering who was knocking on his door at this hour. When he opened it, he found a man in a suit standing on his doorstep, his face as grim as the storm clouds above. I'm looking for a woman, the man said, his voice steady, yet urgent. A pilot. She crashed near here. Have you seen anyone? Jonah's mind raced. The man's voice was calm, but there was a desperation hidden beneath it. Jonah looked back at the woman on the couch, his heart pounding in his chest. The man was clearly looking for her. But he didn't know what he was getting into. Jonah stood frozen at the door, staring at the man in the suit. The stranger's posture was stiff, professional, but there was a certain urgency in his voice that sent a shiver down Jonah's spine. Who are you? Jonah asked, his voice low, cautious. The man paused for a moment, his eyes flicking nervously to the darkening horizon. His hand was clenched tightly around a briefcase, and his gaze seemed to dart back and forth between Jonah and the farmhouse behind him. There was something about him that didn't sit right. My name is Mark Donovan, the man replied, his tone clipped. I'm part of a search and rescue operation. We've been tracking a plane that went down in the area. The pilot was on a private flight. I need to find her. Now. Jonah felt the weight of the words settle on him like a storm cloud. The last thing he expected was someone looking for a woman, especially a pilot, on his quiet farm. Mark Donovan's presence felt like an intrusion, something Jonah wasn't prepared for. He had no idea who this woman was, but the way Donovan spoke, with such assurance, told Jonah this was no ordinary crash. Why don't you come inside? Jonah said, stepping aside, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and caution. We've got her inside. But she's badly hurt. Mark Donovan didn't hesitate. He followed Jonah into the farmhouse, his eyes scanning every corner of the room as he moved through the door. Emily was kneeling next to the woman on the couch, still trying to assess her injuries. Donovan's eyes immediately locked onto the woman's face. His expression softened for a moment, then hardened again as he approached. He didn't say a word at first, his gaze lingering on the bloodied pilot's uniform, the dirt in her hair, and the gold watch glinting faintly on her wrist. Jonah noticed the man's body language shift. There was a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken but very real. It was as if Donovan was holding back some vital piece of information, something that could explain the strange way he was reacting. Is she alive? Donovan finally asked, his voice sounding almost impatient. Emily looked up at him, her face pale. Barely. But she's breathing. I think the worst of her injuries are internal, though. She might need surgery, soon. Jonah could see the man's jaw tighten at Emily's words. I know who she is, Donovan muttered, almost to himself. Her name is Amelia Graves. She's not just a pilot. She's a millionaire. A major player in the tech industry. I've been tracking her for days now, ever since her plane went off radar. Jonah's stomach churned. A millionaire? He glanced back at the woman lying unconscious on his couch. The idea seemed almost impossible. She looked like a survivor of some terrible accident, not someone rich enough to fly around in private jets. His eyes narrowed. Something didn't add up. Why is someone like her out here? Jonah asked, his voice edged with suspicion. And why are you looking for her? Mark Donovan shifted uneasily, his eyes flicking between Jonah and Emily. That's classified, he replied curtly. I can't explain much. But if you want to keep her alive, you need to trust me. We need to get her to a secure location. She's in danger. Emily stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. She turned to Jonah, her eyes full of uncertainty. Jonah, what are we supposed to do? She's hurt, but if she's really who he says she is, we can't just let her go, can we? Jonah stood silently for a moment, his mind racing. He didn't trust this Mark Donovan. He didn't trust the story of a millionaire pilot crashing on his farm in the middle of nowhere. But what bothered him even more was the sense of urgency and fear Donovan had in his eyes. Something bigger was at play here, and Jonah didn't like being caught in the middle of it. We can't move her yet, Jonah said firmly. She's in no condition to go anywhere. You said she's in danger, but how do we know you're not the one who's dangerous? Donovan's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. I understand your hesitation, but trust me when I say this, Amelia Graves has something important, something very important, that people will stop at nothing to get. And they'll come for her soon. They've already started searching for her, and they'll be here before long. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. Jonah felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just some random accident. This was a man with a secret, and that secret was about to change everything. Suddenly, a loud, distant noise interrupted the tense silence. The unmistakable sound of a helicopter, its rotors cutting through the air, echoed from the sky. Donovan's head snapped toward the window, his expression filled with sudden panic. They're here, he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. We don't have much time. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. He rushed to the window, peering through the glass. In the distance, a helicopter was descending, its silhouette growing larger by the second. The low, ominous hum of its engine sent a chill down his spine. Emily moved quickly to the woman's side, her face a mixture of fear and determination. We need to do something. Now. Jonah's thoughts raced. There was no way he could let these strangers take her. But there was no way he could keep her here either, not with the helicopter closing in. The decision weighed on him like 1,000 pounds. He could trust Donovan, but the man was hiding something. The helicopter could be a threat, or it could be part of the plan. But one thing was certain, Jonah couldn't sit idly by. He had to act, and he had to act fast. Without thinking, Jonah grabbed a blanket and draped it over Amelia's body. We need to get her out of here. Now. Donovan's eyes widened in surprise. You don't know what you're doing. But Jonah was already heading for the back door. He couldn't wait for Donovan's approval. They needed to move. Just as he reached for the door handle, a voice called out from the front yard. Jonah. It was Emily. Jonah, wait. He froze, his heart stopping. What now? From the corner of his eye, he saw her, Amelia's eyes fluttering open. And for the briefest of moments, she stared directly at him, her gaze filled with something he couldn't quite place. Then she whispered, barely audible, they're coming for me. They won't stop until they have me. The door slammed open behind him, and Jonah's world tilted on its axis. Jonah's mind raced as he stood frozen by the door, the weight of Amelia's words hanging in the air. They're coming for me. They won't stop until they have me. The words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over as if they were branded into his thoughts. He turned slowly to look at Amelia, who was still lying on the couch, her eyes wide and filled with terror, her body trembling with the remnants of the crash and exhaustion. Who's coming for you? Jonah asked, his voice low, his tone filled with confusion. He couldn't understand it. A millionaire tech mogul, a pilot in distress, and a search and rescue agent whose story didn't quite add up. None of it made sense. Amelia's lips parted, but no words came out. She was clearly struggling to speak, her breath shallow, her eyes glazed. Mark Donovan stepped forward, looking between Jonah and Amelia, his expression grim. You don't understand, do you? Donovan's voice was tinged with frustration. This isn't just about her being a pilot. Amelia is involved in something much bigger than you can imagine. She's the key to a multi-billion-dollar technology deal, one that some very dangerous people are willing to kill for. Jonah's heart skipped a beat. The implications of Donovan's words hit him like a punch to the stomach. This was no ordinary woman. Amelia wasn't just an innocent passenger in a crash, she was the target of something far more sinister. What kind of deal are we talking about? Jonah asked, his voice cracking slightly. He took a step closer to Amelia, who was now whispering something to herself, her voice barely audible. Mark Donovan hesitated, his eyes flicking to Amelia's unconscious form before turning back to Jonah. I can't go into the details, but it's a tech deal, a revolutionary AI program that could change the world. And Amelia was the one who developed it. Her company is on the verge of selling it to a group of investors who are known for their ruthless tactics. They'll stop at nothing to make sure she doesn't back out. Jonah's mind was spinning. A tech mogul? AI programs? He was just a farmer. The last thing he knew about was technology beyond his tractor and phone. But something about Amelia, her presence, the way she had looked at him just moments ago, told him that everything had changed. This was bigger than his farm, bigger than anything he'd ever known. He glanced back at Amelia, who now seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness. Her hand twitched slightly, but she didn't seem to have the strength to say anything more. Jonah, Donovan said, lowering his voice to a more urgent tone, you need to understand something. The people chasing her, they're not just after the technology. They want her too. She's the one holding the key to it all. Without her, they can't finalize the deal. They can't control the program. And that's why they're going to kill her if they have to. Jonah felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined. Amelia wasn't just a casualty of a plane crash. She was a pawn in a dangerous game, a game that could cost her life if Jonah didn't make the right move. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, its rotors cutting through the air like a drumbeat of doom. Jonah's heart pounded. The helicopter wasn't just a rescue mission, it was the harbinger of more danger. Emily moved quickly to Amelia's side, her face etched with worry. Jonah, we have to do something. She can't just stay here. These people won't stop until they have her, and we can't protect her forever. Jonah turned back toward Donovan. What are you saying we do? Donovan's gaze hardened, his jaw clenching as he glanced out the window again. We need to get her out of here. Fast. I have a place, somewhere safe where they can't find her. But we have to leave now. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. Jonah didn't hesitate. How do we know we can trust you? You're just a guy with a briefcase and a lot of secrets. Donovan's eyes locked with Jonah's. There was a sharpness in his gaze, a no-nonsense attitude that made Jonah's stomach twist. I'm trying to save her life, whether you trust me or not. The question is, can you keep her alive? Because if you don't help her, no one else will. Jonah's mind raced as he looked at Amelia, her fragile form barely moving, her shallow breaths the only sign that she was still with them. There was no time to waste. The danger was real. He had to make a decision, fast. Emily, Jonah said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Get her ready. We're leaving. Emily's eyes widened. What? Are you sure? We can't just leave our farm. What if they come for us? We don't have a choice. This is bigger than us now, Jonah said, his voice calm but resolute. He turned to Donovan. Lead the way. But if you're lying to us, if this is some sort of trap. I'm not lying, Donovan interrupted, his voice low. But you'll want to keep your eyes open. There's more going on here than you realize. Jonah nodded, turning back to Emily as she quickly moved to prepare Amelia for the journey. The helicopter's sound grew louder, closer. Every second felt like an eternity. They had to move. With one last look at the farmhouse, the place that had been his sanctuary for so many years, Jonah grabbed Amelia by the arm and gently lifted her into his arms. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. His peaceful, simple life was slipping away, replaced by something far more dangerous and unknown. Donovan led the way to a truck parked behind the barn. It was an old model, dusty and unremarkable, but to Jonah, it was the only hope they had. He climbed into the truck with Amelia still cradled in his arms, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, her face a mask of determination. As the truck started, Jonah looked back at the farmhouse one last time, knowing that they were leaving behind the life he had known. And as they drove into the night, the sound of the helicopter followed them, never far behind. The truck sped through the winding dirt roads, the headlights casting long shadows on the tall trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. Jonah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The silence in the truck was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the old vehicle as it hit bumps in the road. Amelia, still unconscious and fragile, rested in his arms. Her shallow breathing was the only sign she was still alive. He tried to keep his focus on the road, but his mind was racing, torn between the unknowns of their situation and the fear gnawing at him. Behind him, Emily was looking out the back window, her face pale, her hand pressed to her mouth as she glanced over her shoulder. She didn't have to say anything for Jonah to understand, the helicopter was still out there, following them, never relenting. The sound of its engines was like a constant weight in the air, pushing down on them, reminding them of the danger they were in. "Jonah, we have to do something," Emily whispered, her voice shaky. "They're getting closer. What if they find us? What if we can't outrun them?" Jonah's gaze flickered briefly to the rearview mirror, but he couldn't see anything through the heavy darkness. He didn't know where the helicopter was, but he could feel its presence, like a predator closing in on its prey. "We'll make it to Donovan's place," Jonah said, his voice rough, as though he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "He said we'll be safe there. We have to trust him. He's our best shot." Emily looked uncertain, her fingers nervously tapping the window. "But what if he's lying? What if he's one of them? What if he's just trying to lead us into a trap?" Jonah didn't have a good answer for that. He didn't know who to trust anymore. All he knew was that Amelia was in trouble, and he couldn't just leave her to whatever fate Donovan had warned them about. The mysterious people after her were too dangerous, and even if Donovan had secrets, it seemed like he was the only one who knew what was going on. Jonah had to gamble on the hope that he wasn't being led into something worse. As the truck bumped along the uneven path, Jonah's mind flashed back to the moment he had first seen Amelia. She had been so vulnerable, so broken. The thought of leaving her with strangers, of handing her over to people who might hurt her, twisted something deep inside him. Despite everything, he felt a strange bond with her. It was as if fate had put her in his path, and now he couldn't turn back. "Stay with me, Amelia," Jonah muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the wheel as if his words might reach her. "We're getting you out of this. I promise." Emily looked at him, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "You're a good man, Jonah. But what if we can't save her? What if it's too late?" Jonah didn't respond. His mind was too busy running through the possible outcomes, each one darker than the last. If they made it to Donovan's safe house, would they be able to keep Amelia hidden long enough? What would happen if the people after her found them before they had a chance to regroup? Suddenly, a loud crack of gunfire echoed through the night. It was so sharp and sudden that Jonah flinched, his heart leaping in his chest. He slammed on the brakes, causing the truck to lurch forward before coming to an abrupt stop in the middle of the road. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, his heart racing. "Get down," he shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Get down now." Emily immediately ducked, throwing herself into the floorboard, her arms wrapped tightly around her head. Jonah could hear the sound of another shot, this time much closer. They were under attack. Jonah's eyes searched the dark road ahead, his heart hammering. His breath came in sharp bursts as the adrenaline surged through his veins. A shadow moved in the distance, something large, like a vehicle, moving quickly toward them. Another helicopter. Or worse, a group of men on the ground. Jonah! Emily screamed from the floor. They're here. They found us. The sound of engines roared louder. It was definitely a vehicle, and it was closing in fast. Jonah knew they couldn't stay here. If they did, they'd be sitting ducks. He floored the gas pedal, sending the truck speeding down the road once more, the tires squealing as they tore through the dirt. The truck jolted forward, bouncing and swerving as Jonah tried to maintain control. The sound of the pursuing vehicle grew louder, and Jonah could hear shouting from behind them. He didn't dare look back. His focus had to be on the road, on keeping them alive. "We can't outrun them forever," Emily said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the truck. "We need a plan, Jonah. A real plan." "I know," Jonah muttered through gritted teeth. "We just have to get to Donovan's place. Just a little longer." The truck hit a large bump, sending the vehicle airborne for a split second before it crashed back down with a jarring thud. Amelia, still unconscious, shifted slightly, her body almost falling from Jonah's lap. He quickly steadied her, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The headlights of the pursuing vehicle flashed in the rearview mirror. They were close. Too close. Jonah slammed his foot down harder on the gas pedal, praying that the old truck would hold together. The forest surrounding them was dark, the trees and underbrush seeming to close in on them. The road was narrowing, twisting through the woods with every turn. Then, just as Jonah thought they might have lost their pursuers, the road ahead was blocked by a large, heavily armored vehicle. It was positioned in the middle of the dirt path, the headlights blinding, and the men inside were already stepping out, weapons in hand. Jonah's breath hitched in his chest. They were trapped. "Jonah!" Emily screamed, her voice filled with panic. "We're done for." But Jonah wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. He slammed the brakes, skidding the truck to a stop just inches from the men and their weapons. He quickly unbuckled his seatbelt, grabbing Amelia and pulling her into his arms. "We have to move now," he shouted, his voice urgent. He reached for the door handle, throwing it open and pushing the door wide. "Stay low," he yelled to Emily. The truck was surrounded. The men were closing in, their faces masked, their eyes cold and unforgiving. But Jonah had one last trick up his sleeve. Before anyone could react, Jonah sprinted toward the thick trees on the side of the road, dragging Amelia with him. Emily followed closely behind, the sounds of footsteps pounding against the ground. The men weren't far behind. Jonah's heart raced as he plunged into the woods, the darkness swallowing him whole. His breath came in ragged bursts as he pushed forward, not stopping for a second, his only thought on keeping Amelia alive. Behind them, the men were yelling, but Jonah didn't look back. The chase was on, and this time, there was no turning back. The dense forest swallowed Jonah and Emily as they sprinted through the trees, the crack of branches and the pounding of footsteps close behind them. Jonah's heart was hammering in his chest, the weight of Amelia in his arms like a heavy burden. Every step they took felt like it might be their last. The men chasing them were relentless, and Jonah knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for, Amelia. The thick brush around them made it hard to see, but Jonah's instincts guided him. He pushed through the undergrowth, his mind focused solely on one goal, survival. The heavy sound of pursuit continued, but they were getting closer to a clearing. He could see the faint light of the moon through the trees. The path ahead was clear for just a few yards. "We have to make it to the river," Jonah said through gritted teeth, breathless from the exertion. "It's the only chance we have. If we can reach the river, we can lose them in the water. The current's strong." Emily nodded, her face pale but determined. Her eyes flickered nervously behind them, searching for any sign of the men closing in. "You think we can outrun them?" Jonah didn't know, but it was their best shot. The sound of helicopters had faded, but the pursuit on foot was becoming more intense. The men were getting closer, and Jonah's mind raced as he thought of the few options they had left. Suddenly, a shout rang out from behind them. "There they are!" The voice was rough, coming from one of the men chasing them. The sound of footsteps quickened, and the tension in Jonah's chest grew heavier. They were almost there. He could feel it in his bones. But the clearing was just ahead, and they needed to make it before the men got any closer. Jonah pushed his legs harder, ignoring the burning in his muscles, ignoring everything except the sound of the rushing water in the distance. They were so close. His foot caught a root, sending him stumbling forward, but he caught himself, not slowing down. Then, a sudden burst of gunfire shattered the air. The sharp crack echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of a bullet slicing through the air, narrowly missing Jonah. His heart skipped a beat, adrenaline spiking. The men were shooting at them now. "Jonah, we can't keep running forever," Emily cried, her voice strained with fear. Jonah's chest tightened. He didn't have a plan beyond the river, but it was the only way out. He pushed himself harder, his feet pounding against the earth, dragging Amelia along. They were almost there, only a few more feet, and then they'd be at the river's edge. A figure emerged from the trees ahead of them, blocking their path. It was one of the men, tall, dressed in dark gear, holding a gun. He stood between them and the water, his stance wide and firm. "Stop right there," the man ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Jonah skidded to a stop just in time, barely avoiding crashing into the man. His eyes flicked to the water just behind the man. He could make it if he moved fast enough. "Get out of the way!" Jonah shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. But the man didn't move. Instead, he raised his gun, pointing it directly at Jonah. "Not so fast," he said, his lips curling into a twisted smile. "You've got nowhere to run. You're trapped." Jonah's mind raced, but before he could think of a plan, a shout came from the direction they had just fled. "There's more of them. They're coming." Emily's voice was filled with panic as she turned, her eyes wild. "We need to act now, Jonah." Jonah felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. They were surrounded. The men were closing in on both sides. He was running out of time, and he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him like a vice. Then, in a flash of instinct, Jonah did the only thing he could think of. He shoved Amelia into Emily's arms. "Go!" Jonah yelled at Emily, his voice raw with urgency. "Get to the river. Now!" "Jonah, no!" Emily's eyes were wide with fear. "What are you doing?" "Get her to safety!" Jonah shouted again, pushing her forward. "I'll hold them off." Without waiting for a response, Jonah turned back to face the man in front of him, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let them capture Amelia. He couldn't let them hurt her. The man took a step forward, raising his gun higher. Jonah's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, he felt a strange calmness wash over him. The world seemed to slow, and everything became clear. He wasn't going to let this man win. Not like this. With a primal roar, Jonah lunged toward the man, tackling him to the ground with all his strength. The man's gun went off, but the bullet went wild, burying itself in the ground beside them. The struggle was fierce, Jonah's fists landing blow after blow, but the man was strong. They rolled across the dirt, each fighting for control. In the distance, Jonah could hear Emily's voice shouting for him. She was almost at the river. Jonah's heart thudded in his chest. He had to finish this. With one final effort, Jonah twisted the man's arm, knocking the gun from his grip. He threw the man off, standing up just in time to see another figure emerge from the trees. It was Donovan. His face was grim, but he was holding a gun, aimed directly at Jonah. No. Jonah shouted, his body tensing. What are you doing? Donovan's eyes were cold, calculating. I'm saving her life. It's too late for you now, Jonah. You should have stayed out of this. Stay out of it? You lied to me. Jonah's voice was filled with rage and disbelief. You're just as bad as them. You were one of them all along. Donovan didn't respond. Instead, he lowered the gun slightly, his finger still on the trigger. The silence between them felt like an eternity, and Jonah knew that one wrong move could end it all. Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, there was a sudden noise, another helicopter. This time, it was much closer. Donovan's gaze shifted for just a moment, his eyes flickering toward the sound. That brief moment of distraction was all Jonah needed. He lunged at Donovan, knocking the gun from his hands in one swift motion. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, and Jonah knew it was time. He grabbed Donovan by the collar and pulled him close, his breath hot with fury. You're not getting away with this. With a quick motion, Jonah knocked Donovan unconscious, leaving him on the ground as he turned to run toward the river. Emily had made it. She was standing on the bank, watching as Jonah sprinted toward her, breathless, Amelia in her arms. They're coming. Emily shouted. Jonah, we need to go. Jonah reached her just as the sound of the helicopter grew deafening. The men were still after them. There was no more time. He grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward the river. Together, they plunged into the icy water, the current rushing around them. As they swam, Jonah's mind was still spinning. He had made it this far. But they weren't out of danger yet. The helicopter's lights were flashing across the sky, but they were already disappearing into the night, carried away by the river. Amelia stirred in Emily's arms, her eyes fluttering open. And for the first time since Jonah had found her, he saw the fear in her eyes, not from the chase, but from something even darker.